Rebecca stared at the cream-colored envelope on her kitchen counter for the third time that week. The elegant script announced the wedding of her college roommate, and tucked inside was a small handwritten note that read, "Please come. It wouldn't be the same without you." She wanted to believe that. She really did. 3 years had passed since the accident. 3 years since a distracted driver ran a red light and changed everything. Rebecca had built an impressive life since then. Her tech company was thriving. Her team respected her. And she'd proven to everyone, including herself, that a wheelchair couldn't stop her from being successful. But weddings were different. The last one she'd attended about a year ago still made her cringe. People had whispered sympathetically, offering to help before she even asked. One distant cousin had actually patted her head like she was a child. She'd left before the cake was cut and cried in her car for 20 minutes. But this was different. This was Catherine, her best friend from college, the woman who had stayed up with her through finals, who had been there in the hospital after the accident, who never treated her any differently. Rebecca owed it to her to show up. So there she was on a sunny Saturday afternoon, rolling through the parking lot of an upscale garden venue. She'd chosen her outfit carefully, a deep blue dress that was both elegant and practical, paired with the silver earrings Catherine had given her last birthday. If she was going to do this, she was going to look good doing it. The venue was beautiful. White chairs arranged in perfect rows on the lawn, flowers everywhere, string lights waiting for evening. Someone had clearly spent a fortune making this day perfect. Rebecca noticed the ramp leading to the main area and felt a small wave of relief. At least she wouldn't have to ask for help getting in. But relief faded quickly as she entered the reception area. The usual stares began almost immediately. Not hostile, never hostile, just uncomfortable. Eyes that landed on her then quickly looked away. Smiles that were a little too bright, a little too forced. She was used to it by now, but that didn't make it easier. "Rebecca, you made it." Catherine appeared in a cloud of white, looking absolutely radiant. She bent down and hugged her tightly. "I'm so glad you're here. Seriously, thank you for coming. You look incredible," Rebecca said, meaning it. "I'm happy for you." "Let me introduce you to some people," Catherine started, but then her mother appeared, whispering urgently about something with the photographer. Catherine's face fell. "I'm so sorry." "I have to. Can we catch up at dinner?" "You're at table 7. I made sure it's right near the dance floor with a perfect view." And just like that, she was gone, leaving Rebecca alone in a sea of people who all seemed to know each other. Rebecca made her way to table 7. It was indeed near the dance floor, with a good view of everything. It also happened to be near the back, slightly separated from the main cluster of tables. She told herself Catherine had meant well. The location really did have a great view. The table sat 8, but only 7 chairs surrounded it. Someone had thoughtfully removed one to make space for her wheelchair. The other seats were empty. Rebecca checked the name cards. All couples or people who clearly knew each other. They probably wouldn't arrive until the ceremony ended. She pulled out her phone, scrolling mindlessly through emails. Around her, the venue filled with guests. Groups laughed together. Couples held hands, old friends embraced. The ceremony would start in 30 minutes. "Is this seat taken?" An elderly woman appeared beside the table, smiling warmly. Rebecca's hopes lifted. "No, please. Oh, I'm sorry, dear. I meant that table over there." The woman pointed to table 6. "My husband is sitting there, and I got confused." "You have a lovely dress, though." "Thank you," Rebecca managed, watching her walk away. The minutes crawled by. A waiter stopped to ask if she needed anything. A lost child asked her where the bathroom was, and she helped him find his mother. But no one sat down. No one lingered. She watched a group of women her age gather near the bar, laughing loudly about something. One of them glanced over, caught Rebecca's eye, and quickly looked away. They shuffled to the other side of the bar, still visible but clearly maintaining distance. Rebecca knew what they were thinking. She knew because she'd heard the whispers before, caught the fragments of conversations. They didn't know what to say. They were afraid of saying the wrong thing, of being offensive, of making things awkward. So instead they said nothing, did nothing, just maintained a polite, careful distance. The ceremony was beautiful. Rebecca watched from her spot at the empty table as Catherine walked down the aisle. She genuinely felt happy for her friend. Catherine deserved this, the love, the joy, the celebration. But happiness for someone else didn't erase the hollow feeling in her chest. When everyone returned for the reception, Rebecca hoped things would change. Surely people would fill her table now, but as guests found their seats, she noticed something odd. People would approach table 7, check their name cards, then hover uncertainly. One couple actually asked a coordinator if they could switch tables. They were told no, and they sat down, on the far end as far from Rebecca as possible while technically still being at the same table. The man nodded politely in her direction. The woman smiled that too bright smile. Then they turned to each other and started a private conversation, creating an invisible wall between themselves and Rebecca. Another couple arrived, younger, probably in their late 20s. They sat down without acknowledging anyone, immediately pulling out their phones. The remaining seats stayed empty. Dinner was served. Rebecca ate her chicken and vegetables in silence while conversation and laughter erupted from every other table. Catherine was 6 tables away, surrounded by family and her new husband's relatives. She kept looking over at Rebecca, giving her apologetic smiles and little waves. Rebecca waved back, trying to show she was fine. She wasn't fine. Music started. The first dance began, then the father-daughter dance. Rebecca watched couples flood the dance floor, holding each other, swaying to the music. She remembered dancing. She'd loved dancing. Her date to junior prom had joked that she never left the dance floor all night. That felt like another lifetime. Another person. Would you like more wine? A waiter appeared at her elbow. No, thank you. She forced a smile. I'm good, but she wasn't good. She was sitting alone at a table that was supposed to seat 8, at a wedding full of people, feeling more isolated than she ever felt in her empty apartment. She'd fought so hard to build her confidence back after the accident. She ran a successful company, managed a team of 30 people, gave presentations to investors without breaking a sweat. But this was harder than any boardroom. Rebecca checked her watch. She could stay another hour, she decided. Just one more hour. Then she could leave without feeling guilty. She'd make an excuse about an early morning meeting. Catherine would understand, and she could go home to her quiet apartment where at least she didn't have to pretend everything was okay. She took a sip of water and watched the celebration continue around her, wondering why she'd convinced herself this time would be different. Some things, she thought, never really change. David stood near the bar, nursing a glass of whiskey he wasn't really drinking. His daughter, Sophie, had abandoned him 10 minutes ago to join the other kids at their designated table. She'd made 3 new friends already. He watched her laugh at something another girl said, and felt that familiar mix of pride and loneliness that had become his constant companion over the past 2 years. You should get out there. Talk to people, his sister had told him before the wedding. It's been long enough. As if grief had an expiration date. As if there was some predetermined timeline for when you were supposed to stop missing your wife. But he'd promised Catherine, the bride, that he'd come. She'd worked with him on a building project last year, and somehow in between discussions about structural integrity and design permits, they'd become friends. She knew about his wife. She knew he was barely keeping it together most days, and still she'd insisted he come, even bringing Sophie. It'll be good for you, Catherine had said, both of you. So here he was, watching other people celebrate love while trying not to think about everything he'd lost. The venue really was beautiful. David couldn't help but notice the architecture, the way the building opened up to the gardens, how the lighting would transition from natural to artificial as evening came. It was his curse. He couldn't go anywhere without mentally redesigning it. His wife used to tease him about that. She'd catch him staring at a restaurant ceiling or examining door frames, and she'd laugh. You're doing it again, she'd say. He missed that laugh. David scanned the crowd, looking for familiar faces. Most of Catherine's guests were from her design firm or her husband's corporate world. David recognized a few people he'd worked with, but no one he particularly wanted to talk to. Everyone here seemed to be part of a pair or a group. Everyone except his eyes landed on a woman sitting alone at a table near the dance floor. She was wearing a blue dress and she was in a wheelchair. What caught his attention wasn't the wheelchair itself, but the way she sat there. Her posture was perfect, confident even, but there was something in her expression. He recognized it because he'd seen it in his own mirror countless times. That look of being present but not quite part of things, of watching life happen around you while feeling like you're behind glass. She glanced at her watch, then looked toward the exit. David could tell she was counting down the minutes until she could leave. What really struck him, though, was what happened next. A middle-aged couple approached her table, checked the name cards, and sat down at the far end. They didn't say hello, didn't introduce themselves, just created this obvious bubble of distance between themselves and her. The woman in the wheelchair's face didn't change, but David saw her shoulders drop just slightly. He'd seen that before, too. After his wife died, he'd noticed how some people treated him at social events. The awkward conversations that died quickly. The invitations that stopped coming. The way married couples seemed uncomfortable around him, as if widowhood might be contagious. People didn't know what to say, so they said nothing. Did nothing. And somehow that was worse than saying the wrong thing. "Daddy." Sophie appeared at his side, tugging his sleeve. "Did you see me?" "I made friends with Lily and Zoe and Hannah. They're so nice." "I saw, sweetheart. I'm glad you're having fun. Are you having fun?" Sophie looked up at him with those eyes that saw too much for an 8-year-old. "Sure," he lied. "You're standing by yourself." "I'm fine right here." Sophie followed his gaze across the room. "Why is that lady sitting alone?" She looked sad. "I don't know, honey. She smiled at me earlier when I walked past. She has a pretty smile." Sophie tilted her head, thinking, maybe she doesn't have any friends here. Maybe. "You don't have any friends here either, Daddy." David almost laughed. Kids had a way of cutting straight to the truth. "You're right about that. So why don't you go sit with her? Then you both won't be alone." It was such simple logic, such a child's solution to a problem that adults had complicated with social anxiety and assumptions and fear of doing the wrong thing. "I don't want to bother her," David said. "But you're both alone. How is that bothering?" Sophie looked genuinely confused. David watched the woman check her watch again. Watched her take a sip of water with hands that were steady but somehow tired. Watched her paste on a polite smile when a waiter asked her something. His wife used to do this to him. She'd push him out of his comfort zone, make him talk to people at parties when he wanted to hide in the corner. "You're too good at being alone," she told him once. "Sometimes you need to let people in." Maybe Sophie had inherited that quality. That ability to see when someone needed connection and simply offer it. "You know what?" David set down his barely touched whiskey. "You're absolutely right." Sophie's face lit up. "Really? Really? But you have to go back to your table while I do this, okay? Don't want you missing dessert." "Okay." Sophie hugged his waist and bounced back toward the kids' table. David took a breath. This was ridiculous. He was 40 years old, a successful architect, and he was nervous about talking to a stranger at a wedding. But something about the woman at that table made him want to do something. Not because he felt sorry for her. There was nothing pitiable about the way she carried herself. But because he understood what it felt like to be the odd one out. And he thought maybe, just maybe, they could be the odd ones out together. He walked across the room, weaving between tables and dancing guests. A few steps from her table, he almost turned back. What if she wanted to be alone? What if he was making assumptions? What if, no, he was overthinking this? He was always overthinking things. David approached the table and cleared his throat. The woman looked up and he noticed her eyes were a striking green. There was intelligence there and wariness and something that looked like exhaustion. "Hi," he said, suddenly feeling like a teenager asking someone to prom. "I'm David. I noticed you're sitting alone and I'm here alone too. Well, with my daughter, but she's made about a dozen new friends and completely abandoned me." He was rambling. He never rambled. "Anyway, I was wondering if maybe you'd like some company. Or actually, if you'd like to be my date for the evening." That sounded weird. "I don't mean date, I just mean, you want to make sure neither of us has to sit alone at a wedding full of couples?" The woman's voice was calm, slightly amused. "Yes, exactly that." She studied him for a moment. David forced himself not to fidget. He could tell she was weighing whether this was genuine or pity, whether he was someone worth trusting or just another person trying to make themselves feel better by doing a good deed. Finally, she extended her hand. "I'm Rebecca. And honestly, that sounds really nice." Her handshake was firm, confident. David felt something loosen in his chest that he hadn't even realized was tight. "Great," he said, smiling for the first time all evening. "Let me just grab my stuff and I'll be right back. Unless, do you want to move to a different table? I saw a couple empty seats closer to the front." "Actually, that would be perfect." As David went to collect his jacket and help Rebecca navigate to a better spot, he glanced back at Sophie. She was watching them with the biggest grin on her face, giving him an enthusiastic thumbs up. Maybe his daughter was wiser than he gave her credit for. Maybe sometimes the solution really was as simple as deciding that no one should have to sit alone. Rebecca didn't know what to expect when David returned with his jacket and a determined look on his face. Part of her still wondered if this was some elaborate pity gesture, the kind where someone feels good about themselves for 5 minutes before finding an excuse to leave. She'd experienced that before too, but then David did something unexpected. He pulled out his phone and showed her a seating chart he'd somehow pulled up. Okay, so table 12 has 2 empty seats, great view, and it's near the bathrooms if you need them. Table 9 is closer to the band but might be too loud. Or there's table 4, which is right by the garden doors if you want fresh air. Your choice, Rebecca blinked. He was actually giving her options, treating this like a real decision, not just doing what he thought was best for her. Table 12 sounds good, she said. Perfect. Lead the way and I'll follow. They made their way across the reception area. Rebecca was acutely aware of people watching them, probably wondering what was happening. David walked beside her, not behind, not trying to push her chair without asking. When they reached table 12, he moved a chair aside to make space, set down his jacket, and sat down next to her like this was the most natural thing in the world. Before Rebecca could say anything, a small tornado in a pink dress came rushing over. "Daddy, you did it!" Sophie practically crashed into the table, her eyes shining with excitement. Then she turned to Rebecca. "Hi, I'm Sophie. You have really pretty earrings." Rebecca couldn't help but smile. "Thank you. I'm Rebecca. I like your dress. It's too itchy, but Daddy said I had to wear it." Sophie climbed into the chair on David's other side. "Are you Daddy's new friend?" "Sophie," David said, his ears turning slightly red. "Maybe let Rebecca breathe for a second." "It's okay," Rebecca laughed. It felt good to laugh. "Yes, I guess I am your dad's new friend." "Good. He needs more friends. He mostly just talks to his computer about buildings." "I design buildings," David explained, looking slightly embarrassed. "I'm an architect." "That's actually really cool," Rebecca said. "I run a tech company, so I also spend a lot of time talking to computers." Sophie's eyes went wide. "You run a whole company?" "Like a boss." "Exactly like a boss. That's so cool. I want to be a boss when I grow up. Or a veterinarian. Or maybe both." Sophie paused, tilting her head. "Can I ask you something?" Rebecca braced herself. Kids were usually more direct than adults, but also more honest. "Sure. What's it like using a wheelchair? Is it hard?" "Sophie," David started, but Rebecca held up her hand. "It's okay, really." She looked at Sophie, appreciating the genuine curiosity instead of awkward avoidance. "Sometimes it's hard. Like when places don't have ramps or when people stare, but most of the time it's just my normal. Like how you probably don't think about walking. I don't think about rolling. It's just how I get around." "That makes sense," Sophie nodded seriously. "My friend Tyler at school uses crutches because he was born different, and he says the same thing. He says the crutches aren't the hard part. It's when people treat him like he's weird." "Your friend Tyler is very smart. Can I try sitting in it sometime? Just to see what it's like?" "Sophie." David looked mortified, but Rebecca was smiling. "You know what? Sure, maybe after dinner, but you have to go back to your table now before they send out a search party." Sophie beamed and skipped away, leaving David shaking his head. "I am so sorry," he said. "She doesn't have a filter sometimes." "Don't be. Honest questions from kids are way better than adults pretending not to notice while definitely noticing." Rebecca picked up her water glass. "She seems like a great kid." "She is." David's expression softened. "She's been through a lot the past couple years." "We both have." There was weight behind those words. Rebecca recognized it because she carried her own weight. "You mentioned you're here alone." "Well, with Sophie." "Yeah. My wife died 2 years ago. Cancer." He said it matter-of-factly, but Rebecca heard the pain underneath. "Catherine, the bride, worked with me on a project last year. She insisted I come, said it would be good for us to get out. I almost didn't, to be honest." "I almost didn't come either," Rebecca admitted. "I've been to weddings before and they're awkward. People don't know how to act around me. They either ignore me completely or treat me like I'm made of glass. Both options are terrible. People did that to me after my wife died," David said. "The married couples especially." Like they didn't know if I was safe to be around anymore. Or maybe I reminded them that bad things can happen and they didn't want to think about it. That's exactly it, Rebecca said, surprised by how much she related. After my accident, some friends just disappeared. Not because they were mean, but because they didn't know what to say. So they said nothing. A waiter appeared with their dinner plates. As they ate, the conversation flowed more easily than Rebecca expected. David told her about a building project that had gone completely wrong when the client kept changing their mind. Rebecca countered with a story about a tech investor who wanted to invest in her company, but only if she let him be CEO because surely she couldn't run a company in her condition. You're kidding, David said, putting down his fork. I wish I was. I told him exactly where he could put his investment money. Rebecca grinned. We found better investors. Good. What kind of tech does your company do? Rebecca explained her work in accessibility software, designing programs that made technology easier for people with various disabilities to use. David listened intently, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested, not just being polite. That's incredible, he said. I try to incorporate accessibility into my building designs, but I'll be honest, I don't always get it right. I'd love to pick your brain about it sometime. If that's not weird to say. It's not weird at all. They talked through dinner about everything and nothing. David told terrible dad jokes that made Rebecca groan and laugh at the same time. Rebecca shared stories about her college days with Catherine, back before the accident when life felt simpler. Neither of them talked about their challenges in a way that felt heavy or depressing. It was just part of their stories, like any other detail. Around them, Rebecca noticed other guests glancing over at their table. But this time the looks were different, not uncomfortable or pitying, just curious. A few people even smiled. Catherine herself stopped by during a break in her bride duties. Rebecca, I'm so glad you two found each other. She looked genuinely delighted. David, you'd better be on your best behavior with my best friend. I promise I've only told 3 bad jokes so far, David said. It was 5, Rebecca corrected. I counted. Catherine laughed and squeezed Rebecca's shoulder before being pulled away again by her new mother-in-law. Sophie returned to the table just as dessert was being served. Reporting on all the games she'd played and friends she'd made, she insisted on sharing her chocolate cake with Rebecca, cutting it carefully in half with her fork. See, Daddy? Sophie said through a mouthful of cake. I told you nobody should sit alone. David met Rebecca's eyes across the table and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe, or recognition. 2 people who'd been through difficult things, who knew what it felt like to be on the outside, who'd somehow found themselves on the inside of something new. You were right, kiddo, David said softly. You were absolutely right. As the band started playing and people moved toward the dance floor, Rebecca realized something surprising. For the first time in 3 years, she wasn't counting down the minutes until she could leave a social event. She was actually enjoying herself, and judging by the genuine smile on David's face, the first real one she'd seen from him all evening, he was too. The music shifted to something upbeat and the dance floor filled with people. Sophie bounced in her seat, clearly itching to join them. Rebecca watched couples spinning and laughing. Groups of friends forming circles, kids doing whatever wild movements counted as dancing at that age. She'd made peace with watching from the sidelines years ago, or at least she'd told herself she had. Daddy, can I go dance? Sophie was already halfway out of her chair. Sure, sweetheart. Stay where I can see you. Sophie took off like a shot, immediately joining a group of kids who welcomed her into their chaotic circle. David watched her with that expression parents get when their kids are happy. A mix of joy and relief and something that looked like gratitude. She's got more energy than I've had in my entire life, Rebecca said. David laughed. Tell me about it. I don't know where she gets it. Some days I can barely keep up. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the celebration. The bride and groom were in the center of everything, surrounded by family and friends. Catherine looked radiant, genuinely happy in a way that made Rebecca's heart swell even as a tiny part of her ached. Not jealousy exactly, more like the ghost of dreams she'd set aside. Do you miss it? David asked quietly. Dancing? Rebecca turned to look at him, surprised by the directness of the question. Most people avoided topics like that, afraid of bringing up what had been lost. Every day, she admitted. I used to dance all the time. Nothing professional, just for fun. I was that person who dragged everyone to the dance floor at parties. What kind of dancing? Everything, badly. Rebecca smiled at the memory. I had zero technique and even less rhythm, but I loved it. The freedom of it, you know? The not caring what anyone thought. David nodded slowly like he was processing something. Then he stood up. Wait here, he said. Before Rebecca could ask what he meant, he was walking toward the dance floor. She watched, confused, as he navigated through the crowd to where Sophie was spinning with her new friends. He bent down, said something to his daughter, and Sophie's face exploded into the biggest smile Rebecca had ever seen. They both came back to the table, Sophie practically vibrating with excitement. Rebecca, David said, and there was something nervous but determined in his voice. Would you like to dance? Rebecca's brain stuttered. What, dance with me? Well, with us, he gestured to Sophie. I know it's not traditional, but I figure if you're up for it, we can figure something out. Daddy said he's really good at wheelchair dancing, Sophie added helpfully. He's probably lying because he's bad at regular dancing, but we can try. Hey, David protested, but he was smiling. I'm not that bad. Rebecca's first instinct was to say no, to make a polite excuse. She'd built walls around herself specifically to avoid moments like this, moments where she might feel exposed or pitied or different. But looking at David's open, honest face and Sophie's hopeful expression, she didn't see pity. She saw two people who just wanted to include her in the fun. I haven't danced in 3 years, Rebecca said. I haven't really danced since my wife died, David replied. So we're both out of practice, come on. What's the worst that could happen? We could look ridiculous. Perfect. Sophie and I look ridiculous all the time. We're professionals at it. Something in Rebecca cracked, the protective shell she'd built around herself since the accident. Maybe it was the way David didn't make it a big deal. Maybe it was Sophie's genuine excitement. Maybe it was just that she was tired of watching life happen around her instead of being part of it. Okay, she said. Let's do it, Sophie cheered. David's grin was wide and real and maybe a little relieved. He came around to her side of the table. So, full disclosure, he said, I have no idea what I'm doing. Just making this up as I go. That makes 2 of us. David positioned himself beside Rebecca's wheelchair and started moving them toward the edge of the dance floor. Not the center where everyone would stare, but close enough to be part of things. Sophie danced alongside them, making up her own moves. The current song ended and the DJ put on something slower, smoother. David caught his eye and gave him a thumbs up like they'd planned this. Maybe they had. Ready? David asked. Absolutely not, Rebecca said, but she was smiling. David started to move, and it took Rebecca a moment to understand what he was doing. He wasn't pushing her chair like she was cargo. He was incorporating it into the dance, turning her in slow circles, moving with the music in a way that included her completely. She caught on and started moving her arms, adding her own movements to the rhythm. Sophie danced circles around them both, giggling and spinning. It wasn't ballroom dancing. It wasn't anything anyone would put in a movie. But it was real and it was joyful, and Rebecca felt something she hadn't felt in years. That freedom she'd been talking about. That sense of just being in a moment without worrying about what anyone thought. Other dancers stopped to watch. Rebecca noticed them in her peripheral vision but found she didn't care. David spun her chair in a wider circle and she raised her arms overhead, feeling the music in a way she'd forgotten was possible. See? Sophie called out. I told you we'd look cool. The DJ, bless him, kept the song going longer than it should have. When it finally ended, there was actual applause. Not the polite kind people do out of obligation, but real clapping and cheering. Catherine appeared out of nowhere, tears streaming down her face. That was beautiful, she said, hugging Rebecca tightly. That was so beautiful. Your mascara is running, Rebecca pointed out. I don't even care. Catherine hugged David too. Thank you. Thank you for getting her out there. As Catherine was pulled away again by her photographer, other guests started approaching. People who'd been at Rebecca's original table earlier, who'd kept their distance, suddenly wanted to talk to her. A woman around her age introduced herself and mentioned she'd also been injured in an accident years ago. A man asked about her company, genuinely interested. The couple who'd sat far away from her before came over to apologize for being weird earlier. Rebecca handled it all with grace. But what she really wanted was to get back to the quiet bubble she'd found with David and Sophie. As if reading her mind, David leaned down and said quietly, Want to get some air? There's a garden area outside that's supposed to be really nice. Please. They excused themselves and made their way to the garden doors. The evening air was cool and perfect. String lights illuminated paths between flowers and decorative trees. A few other guests wandered the space, but it was quieter here, calmer. Sophie ran ahead, investigating everything with her endless energy. David walked beside Rebecca as they followed a path deeper into the garden. "Thank you," Rebecca said after a moment. "For the dance. For all of this." "Thank you for saying yes," David replied. "I was terrified you'd think I was being condescending or weird." "It was weird," Rebecca admitted. "But good weird. The best kind of weird." They reached a small fountain where Sophie was trying to spot fish in the water. The sounds of the reception faded to a pleasant background hum. "You know what the crazy thing is?" Rebecca said. "I almost didn't come tonight. I was this close to sending my regrets and staying home." "I almost didn't come either," David said. "Sophie had to guilt me into it." "Thank you, Sophie," Rebecca called out. Sophie looked up from the fountain. "You're welcome. I'm really good at helping Daddy make good choices." David and Rebecca both laughed. Above them, stars were starting to appear in the darkening sky. The wedding continued behind them. But here in this moment it was just the three of them, and Rebecca realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She didn't want this night to end. The wedding wound down around 10 o'clock. Sophie had fallen asleep on David's shoulder, exhausted from dancing and making friends and eating too much cake. Rebecca walked with them toward the parking lot, neither of them quite ready to say goodbye, but both knowing they had to. "This is me," Rebecca said, stopping next to her van. It was specially modified with a ramp and hand controls, something she'd invested in after realizing taxis and ride shares weren't always accessible. "That's really nice," David said, genuinely admiring it. "The modifications look professionally done. They should be. They cost a fortune." Rebecca unlocked the door and prepared to transfer into the driver's seat. She'd done this 1,000 times and could manage perfectly fine alone. But David positioned himself nearby, not hovering, just present if she needed anything. She didn't, but she appreciated that he'd stayed. "So," David said once she was settled, "this might be forward, but can I get your number? I promise I'm not being creepy. I had a really good time tonight. First time I've actually enjoyed myself at a social event in 2 years." Rebecca felt a flutter in her chest, something she hadn't felt in so long she'd almost forgotten what it was. Hope, maybe, or possibility. "First time in 3 years for me," she said, pulling out her phone. "And yes, you can have my number. Fair warning, though, I'm terrible at texting back promptly. I get buried in work." "Same. Sophie says I look at my phone like it's trying to speak a foreign language." They exchanged numbers, both smiling like teenagers. Sophie stirred on David's shoulder but didn't wake up. "I should get her home," David said reluctantly. "But I'll text you. If that's okay." "That's very okay." Rebecca drove home in a daze. Her apartment felt different when she rolled through the door. Still the same space, same furniture, but somehow less lonely than when she'd left it that morning. She got ready for bed, replaying the evening in her mind. The dance, the conversation, the way David had treated her like a person first, everything else second. Her phone buzzed as she was settling into bed. Made it home. "Sophie woke up long enough to tell me I need to be friends with the nice lady, because she liked her. Pretty sure I like her too. Thanks for taking a chance on sitting with a random guy and his 8-year-old. "David," Rebecca smiled and typed back. "Thanks for asking. First time I haven't regretted going to a wedding in years. Tell Sophie she's an excellent matchmaker. Rebecca, don't let her hear you say that. She'll start a business. Good night." Good night. The next morning, Rebecca woke up feeling lighter somehow. She made coffee and opened her laptop to work, but found herself distracted by thoughts of the wedding. Around noon, her phone rang. "Catherine, tell me everything," Catherine demanded the moment Rebecca answered. "I saw you dancing with David Morrison. The David Morrison who hasn't talked to anyone at a social event since his wife died. What happened?" Rebecca told her the whole story, from sitting alone to David's invitation to the dance. Catherine squealed so loudly Rebecca had to hold the phone away from her ear. "I knew it," Catherine said. "I knew if I sat you at that table something good would happen. I saw him standing alone and thought you two might connect. Wait, you planned this?" "Not exactly. But I hoped. Was that terrible of me?" "It was manipulative and interfering, and I'm actually grateful," Rebecca admitted. "Don't let it go to your head." A week passed. David texted her a few times with random things. A terrible architecture joke. A photo Sophie had drawn of the wedding lady with the pretty dress. Rebecca sent back pictures of error messages her team was dealing with, memes about tech company life, and a photo of her coffee mug that said, "I'm silently correcting your code." On Thursday, David sent a longer message. "Sophie has been asking about you nonstop. Also, my firm is working on a new office building and we're struggling with the accessibility features. Would you be interested in consulting? Paid work, obviously. Or if you're too busy, I completely understand." Rebecca stared at the message. Part of her wondered if this was just an excuse to see her again. The other part didn't care because she wanted to see him again, too. "I'd be interested. When are you free to discuss the project? How about coffee tomorrow? There's a place near my office. Very accessible, I already checked. Tomorrow works." The coffee meeting turned into 3 hours of discussion that was half business, half personal. David showed her the building plans and Rebecca pointed out issues he hadn't considered. Where to place automatic doors, how to design the elevator buttons, why the proposed bathroom stalls wouldn't work for wheelchair users. "This is exactly what we needed," David said, making notes frantically. "I can't believe I missed so many of these things. Most architects do. It's not taught well in schools, and unless you're living it, it's hard to see. Would you be willing to come to our office next week? Present this to the team? We have 4 other projects that could use your input." It started as a one-time consultation, then it became a regular thing. Rebecca found herself at David's architecture firm once a week, reviewing designs, teaching his team about accessible design. The work was satisfying in a way she hadn't expected. She was making a real difference, helping create buildings that wouldn't exclude people like her. But more than that, she was spending time with David. They didn't call it dating at first. They were just 2 people getting coffee after work meetings. Just 2 people texting each other random thoughts throughout the day. Just 2 people who happened to enjoy each other's company. Sophie was part of it too. She'd join them sometimes, chattering about school and friends and the book she was reading. Rebecca found herself genuinely caring about this kid's life, asking about her science project, helping her with math homework while David grabbed dinner. 3 months after the wedding, David's firm landed a major contract for a smart building complex. During the presentation, they recommended Rebecca's company for all the technology integration. Her team got the contract, the biggest one they'd landed in 2 years. "We got it because we're good," Rebecca told her staff. "But I can't pretend David's recommendation didn't help. He went to bat for us hard." That night she called him. "Thank you for the recommendation, for believing in my company. I recommended you because you're the best at what you do," David said. "The fact that I also really like spending time with you is just a bonus." There it was, out in the open. "I really like spending time with you too," Rebecca said quietly. "So, would you want to have dinner with me? Like an actual date, not a work meeting that turns into dinner." Rebecca smiled. "I would love that." Their first official date was simple. Italian food at a small restaurant that David had called ahead to make sure was accessible. They talked for hours, the way they'd been doing for months, but this time there was an acknowledged shift. This was something more. "Can I tell you something?" David said as they walked, or in Rebecca's case, rolled, through a park after dinner. "That night at the wedding, Sophie told me I should sit with you because we were both alone. I almost didn't do it. I thought it would be weird or presumptuous. I almost said no when you asked," Rebecca admitted. "I'd built these walls around myself. Convinced myself it was easier to be alone than to let people in and risk them leaving or treating me differently. I did the same thing after my wife died. It was easier to just focus on Sophie and work and not open myself up to anyone new." They stopped at a fountain, watching the water catch the evening light. "I'm glad you took the chance," Rebecca said. "Me too." David reached over and took her hand. It was simple, that gesture, but it meant everything. 6 months later, Rebecca attended another wedding as someone's date. This time she wasn't sitting alone at the back. She was in the second row holding David's hand, with Sophie between them wearing a new dress she'd picked out herself. As the bride walked down the aisle, Sophie leaned over and whispered loudly, "Is this going to be you and Daddy someday?" David turned bright red. Rebecca just smiled. "Maybe," she whispered back. "Someday." Life had a funny way of working out. Sometimes the best things happened when you were brave enough to say yes to an invitation from a stranger. Sometimes all it took was one person deciding that nobody should have to sit alone. Sometimes that decision changed everything. Rebecca squeezed David's hand and he squeezed back. Sophie grinned like she'd orchestrated the whole thing, and maybe in her own 8-year-old way she had.